Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law for a stream with a new friend, one will hope, another YouTube attorney who has been making some waves and doing some wonderful work, very successful work, a man in his own right who has been growing, a criminal defense attorney from Arizona. I wish to welcome my guest tonight, Mr. Robert Gruler, who just finished his own stream and now is here to stream more with us because he loves us all that much.
I do. It's good to see you on Civil Law.
It's fantastic, yes. So I wanted to start by saying that I read your book and I thought it was very good, and I really enjoyed the introduction of it and how you came to be a criminal defense attorney. I thought it was a pretty interesting story that you came into law school with one impression of, this zealous, sword-bearing, sword of justice that will slice through everything, and the prosecutor can do no wrong. And then you basically had an internship in the summer of your 1L for a defense attorney, and you realized that maybe things aren't really that way in the real world. Maybe these are actual people. So I thought it was a really interesting story and background.
Yeah, I mean, you summarized it well. It's exactly how it was for me when I was a younger man. I was very much sort of in favor of the government largely, and this idea of justice and this concept that the people who are our prosecutors and our politicians and our police officers, they're our heroes, and they would never do anything wrong, and they just care about doing justice, and that our society was sort of set up in a way that will encourage people to become better versions of themselves after they've come out of the justice system. Once they've gotten in trouble, they come out the other end, they're better off. And that resonated with me. And I thought, I want to go be a part of that solution. I want to help more people get better. If they're committing crimes, there's obviously something wrong. We want to help encourage them to be a better, useful, productive member of society. And so when I was in my 1L year, my first year in law school, I was that kind of kid in criminal law that would always take the side of the government. I mean, we would break up into little, I don't know if they did this in your law school, where, you'd break up into like little working groups, and they'd give you a case and you'd have to argue one side or the other and sort of, as a group dissect some of the issues. And it was always like 10 versus 1. Everybody was in favor of the poor defendant who had his, rights violated. And over here, I'm like, well, he was guilty, wasn't he? Like, he had the drugs in the back. Like, who cares about search and seizure? Who cares about any of that stuff? We should lock that guy up quickly. And I kind of rode that out through my first year in law school until I went to work at a criminal defense law firm. And I wanted to go work at a criminal defense law firm because I could not get an internship at our prosecutor's office. I was too young. I was a 1L. They don't want you there yet. They wanted 2Ls and 3Ls, second year and third year students. So I went to work for a criminal defense attorney, a law firm here. I actually got my first job through those guys. And I spent, I don't know, maybe 6 months over a summer. The idea was, I'm going to go see how these scumbag loser defense lawyers.
Yeah, I saw that in your book. It was nice.
And I'll be a better prosecutor.
Yeah.
I spent a little time there working with people and understanding that, these are people just like you and me, like your viewers. This is just everyday guys and gals who just, got into one little speed bump. And then I would be working on their case. I would take what I thought would be a very reasonable resolution. Hey, okay, this person did this. Yes, certainly. But here are all the amazing things that they've done to mitigate that harm. And let's work this out. Why do we have to send this guy to jail for 6 months? Why do we have to send this person to prison? They're an addict. They don't need to go to prison. And I started to work with these other prosecutors who would just say, sorry, that's the law. We have mandatory sentencing. The statute charts look like this. The sentencing guidelines are X, Y, and Z. They fall within that box. Nothing we can do. Talk to my supervisor about it. And I started to see this pattern just one after another. And it really, really was unsettling. It was really kind of a gross feeling. And I just decided I would never do that. And it was a pretty eye-opening experience. And from that moment on, I've just been, I say pure blood defense lawyer. No prosecutor hints or inkling at all.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story. And it's one of those things of, I don't know if turn of fate is the right idea, but one of those things that a note in your life that you didn't necessarily see coming that put you down a particular direction. for me, my story is not as sexy as yours, but when I was a 1L, I realized because I had a technical undergrad degree in computer science, I qualified for this thing called the patent bar. And so that's what got me into being a patent lawyer in that field. So that was, a turn that I didn't necessarily anticipate when I started law school that put me down a particular direction. And when you were telling your story, and when I was reading in your book, I was thinking to myself, what if it had been the other way around? What if, the defense attorney's office wouldn't hire you because you're a 1L, but the prosecutor's office would have. I was thinking to myself, I wonder what alternative Robert would have thought. Maybe he would have seen the victims of crime, and he would have seen the people that were hurt by it, and was seeing people who are on their 10th felony and getting off, in a turnstiles in the courthouse. I wonder if alternative Robert would have had a different opinion. I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but that was something I thought about in my book. I was like, I wonder if things have been different.
Yeah, I easily could see that. I'm pretty fortunate, I think, that certain dominoes have fallen the way that they have in my life, and I could have easily seen myself, being a very, very cutthroat prosecutor and somebody who didn't have a lot of empathy, didn't have a lot of compassion for other people. And I'm not saying that every prosecutor believes that, right? There are good prosecutors. There are prosecutors out there who I've had conversations with who will level with me eye to eye, and they'll say, listen, I understand your perspective. This was an egregious offense. Your mitigation, will help me around these margins, but we're not going to be able to get you, we can meet in the middle somewhere. We can have a good negotiation, get it what I would consider to be a just result. So I would like to think, like to think that I would have been that type of a prosecutor. But at the same time, there are a lot of prosecutors, at least here in Maricopa County, who are very, very, isolated, and they're very sort of cordoned off from the humanitarian side of the law. They just are like automatons, like robots, and they just sort of process cases through. And I don't know that I would have ever gotten into that line of work, because I'm just not that type of person. I like activity. I like people. I have a lot of empathy for people. I get all of that from my mother. Sometimes, maybe a little too much of it, but I take it to heart, because what really inspires me is helping people. I like that idea. And it's hard to do that as a prosecutor when you're just locking people up for a decade at a time. It's just not, it doesn't feel as constructive to me.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about the compassion element of being a defense attorney, because in your book you talk about your experiences in coming up in high volume defense outfits where it was, let's just plead them, whether that was by design or otherwise. That's what it turned into. And we have so many people coming through the door that all we can do is just take the money and plead them and put them out the door again. So, it becomes very mechanical without much compassion or empathy. It becomes another business item. So I think that can happen on both prosecutor side and defense side. And I also think that I think there's also an element for compassion from the prosecutor, because then it just becomes a question of who do you have compassion for? Because I mean, there are arguably victimless crimes, to be sure, but you can even quibble about those to some degree.
Sure.
But you could have a prosecutor who's like, well, yeah, I'm very compassionate. I'm compassionate for the crime victims. I'm compassionate for the people getting the drugs. I'm compassionate for the person who might be hit by this person who's been a reckless driver, who's been a DUI, who, my compassion goes to those people. So it's just interesting seeing, I think compassion is a good goal, but I don't necessarily think it's just one way. And it'd be interesting to see how that compassion streak might work in an alternative world. That's just thoughts that went through my mind.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I easily could have been that type of a prosecutor, right? I mean, you can make a good argument. This is why I think it's important that you have strong prosecution and strong defense. And if you can have two people on opposite ends of the aisle, right, of the spectrum of justice, and they're both passionate about what they do and they both do a good job, at some point, you're going to kind of meet in the middle. You're going to have a synthesis or resolution. And so I don't know what what a hypothetical prosecution Rob would look like, but I certainly can see myself, justifying or sort of explaining away my role in those terms as compassion, as justice, as, you know, righting a wrong that society has incurred, whether it's a drug, a victimless crime, or anything, right? You know, there's a good argument that you need rules, you need laws. And I was just talking a little bit about this on the live stream, sort of the idea between, you know, active liberty and, you know, originalism. And I was giving an example of a loaf of bread. You know, if you have a loaf of bread and your neighbor comes and steals it, an originalist might say, well, that was a theft. They stole that loaf of bread out of your property. They should be punished. I'm a defense attorney. I also kind of tend to be an originalist, right? The law is what the law is. That person who stole the bread broke the law. They go suffer the consequences of that, right? And that's speaking as a defense attorney. Versus the other end of the argument would be somebody like you know, an active liberty type of an individual who's saying, well, that loaf of bread was needed. That person was hungry. They were going to die. You know, they needed to be fed. They needed to feed their kids and all of that stuff. And so, you know, I can make arguments a number of different ways. I happen to think that I'm fortunate that I sort of caught the wave that I did, because I look at a lot of prosecutors and I look at a lot of people on the other side of the aisle, and I think that they, even though they may be very good people, they're sort of becoming a victim of the bureaucracy, of the politicians, of the law, just, you know, all over and they're just sort of another wheel in the cog, as it were. And as a defense attorney, I get to be a lot more creative. I get to do things that are a little bit more, I would say, a little bit more challenging to some degree. You know, like we're supposed to lose cases. We have the losing end of the stick in many situations. And so it worked out for me. I'm very fortunate to be here, but I easily could have seen how it could have gone a different direction for sure.
Well, that's really, really cool. And thank you for humoring me to talk about that, because those were just the things that I was reading and all that. And I also saw that you're running a foundation, if I understand correctly, with your mother as well, in memory of your brother, because of his tragic death. And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in that domain.
Yeah, thanks for asking about it. Thanks for the questions. I wasn't sure what we're going to be talking about, but I appreciate you giving me the leeway to just tee off on these things. So, yeah, you know, in 2016, so I'm the oldest of three boys. I'm the oldest. Then my middle brother is Joey, and he has Down syndrome, and he's 1 year younger than I am. And then my youngest brother, Eric, is no longer with us. In 2016, Eric is 3 years younger than myself. He didn't have Down syndrome. So it was me, then Joey, then Eric. Eric was, you know, normal without Downs. And Eric had a very long difficult struggle with pain pills and opiates. And when he was a young boy, he broke his wrist several times, actually, playing football and BMX biking and whatnot. And at some point he had to have pins put into his wrist, right? He had surgery, a plate put in there, number of different screws and pins and all that stuff. He worked at Discount Tire as well. And one summer when he was torquing down on a lug nut wrench. So what they do when you go in, you change your tires, they'll zip on all of the lug nuts onto your tire, zip, 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 zip. Then they use this torque wrench to really just crank down on the lug nuts to make sure that they're on appropriately. Well, he was doing that on his bad wrist, and his wrist just exploded. I mean, really, like it was bad. And, you know, that set off a whole number of surgeries and pain pills, and doctors were prescribing him just loads of, you know, oxys. And we all kind of know where this story goes, right? You get hooked up on, you know, one doctor. He was seeing multiple doctors, getting hundreds of pills a month. Eventually that gravy train sort of runs off, and he switched over to heroin, you know, and that was a big battle that he suffered with. But my whole family was along the ride with him for a long part of that. And then in 2016, it just became too much. And so, you know, I tell a story about me and my drinking, my alcoholism, sort of went into hyperdrive after my brother passed away. You know, I was basically there the morning that my mom found him and wheeled his body out of the apartment and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it was a really traumatic time for me. And what we found is that, you know, there are a lot of services that exist for people who are sort of in the throes of addiction or in the throes of mental problems, right? There's resources. You can call the National Suicide Hotline. You can go to treatment. You can go to rehab centers. But when somebody dies, it's kind of the end of the line. And there's not a lot of resources for the families who were sort of left in the wake. And so in 2016, my brother took his own life, and we were very, very, it was a mess. You know, our family, it was a mess. And so what my mom did is she started an organization called ericshouse.org. And it's an organization, it's a 501c3, you know, nonprofit. It started out as just my mom and I sort of having these monthly meetups where we would just get together at hotel lobbies and just talk about sort of, you know, grief and how we're doing with things. And then shortly thereafter, a number of people started joining us. Then eventually somebody donated a house. And so now we have Eric's house, and it's this house where it's over here in Paradise Valley in Arizona, where there's a lot of healing that takes place, but we have a number of different modalities to help people through their grief journey. So the primary purpose of the organization is to help people who've lost a loved one due to suicide, overdose, or sudden loss. So that can be, you know, we had some guys in our men's group who lost their child to like an ATV accident or a car accident, you know, something that happened just quickly and it's sudden. And so it's healing for those people. And we do all sorts of stuff. There's men's groups, women's groups. We have a labyrinth built out back. We say prayers and walk around. And a lot of people have been able to find a little bit of peace by just getting plugged into a community. You know, suicide is one of those things that still has a lot of stigma around it. People don't like to talk about it. Even some of my best friends have not even mentioned it to me. You know, it's one of those things that's hairy. And this is a different place. This is a place where you can go and heal. And that's really all. It's a pretty amazing place. So if anybody, you know, is suffering from one of those losses, check it out.
Well, that sounds like really awesome work. And I've never had an experience like that. And I don't think that, you know, I'd be able to handle it particularly well. So it's validating to know that someone out there is trying to do something to try to help people through those experiences. I can't even begin to contemplate what that would be like. The way you described the phone call from your mother in your book was visceral.
Yeah.
And it was, I felt like I was feeling some fraction of the reality of it. And even that was a bit painful. And I was like, couldn't even begin to try to contemplate that. So, you know, I think it's wonderful work, and I appreciate that you're doing it. So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for asking about it. Really. I mean, it's one of those things that I don't talk about a whole lot because of that, you know, and I don't want to be sort of seen as capitalizing on that or, you know, overly, you know, being vocal about that. But I appreciate you asking about it because, you know, we're in the middle of a lot of people are seeing some of that. You know, suicides are through the roof, domestic violence is through the roof, alcoholism is through the roof, drug use is through the roof. And so,
and I mean, opiate addiction and conversion to heroin is in no sense a new problem. We saw plenty of that well before 2020 with the opioid crisis, and plenty of people switching to heroin because it's cheaper in a lot of places.
Right. And more accessible.
Becoming accessible, cheaper. It's like, I once saw a very tongue-in-cheek article that said it was meant to point out how like the restrictions against Benadryl and like other pseudoephedrine or ephedrine drugs were really silly, because it's like it was how to chemically convert meth into Benadryl and stuff, like to go the other way around to convert it, because like it's like, well, you know, you want something to help you with your nasal cleansing. Now you could use meth, but that has a lot of also downsides that are not ideal. So here's the chemical formula to go the other way and convert back into ephedrine. I'm like, I thought that was really, really cute. So so I thought maybe we could talk about a couple stories that are in the news and would be of mutual interest based on your show. I talk a lot about qualified immunity cases on my channel. My channel covers pretty much, I try to cover a wide range of cases. Basically, courts of appeal from the federal courts or U.S. Supreme Court, the occasional state case, state Supreme Court. So usually something on appeal somewhere. And we cover some criminal cases too, but a lot more civil, I think. And we cover 42 U.S.C. 1983, like it's going out of style. And the video I actually posted today was the Supreme Court actually reversing a grant of qualified immunity, which hasn't happened in a long time, where they actually said, no, you shouldn't have qualified immunity.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah, it was this term. It's not that old. It actually comes out of my state of Texas, dealing with some truly horrific prison conditions, where the Fifth Circuit said qualified immunity, and the Supreme Court actually said, actually, no, not so much. So I don't know if they're trying to give some broader signal, but yeah, that was from this term. So you can check that
Yeah.
out. And anyone else,
Yeah.
check my video that I posted earlier today.
I will. I will look at that. Yeah, I was curious about where that would go because when we were doing some of our analysis on our channel about Amy Coney Barrett, the
Mhm.
one of her opinions was I think I could be mistaken on it, but I think the one that we covered was in favor of sort of rolling back some of the protections of qualified immunity, and it
Yeah.
was about literally lying in a probable cause statement. So there was some officer who just literally like lied flagrantly, admitted that he lied later, and said, "Well, I'm still protected under qualified immunity because of the inevitable discovery type of doctrine." And then she said, "No, that doesn't fly." And I was like, "Okay, I kind of like that," which is a little bit of a surprise coming from a conservative judge.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been a doctrine that's really questionable. I'm not sure why it was ever adopted. The standard that we used to have before qualified immunity was a case called Skidmore, and basically Skidmore just applied the reasonable officer test, which seems like perfectly fine because we use reasonable man test in many of its varieties. So, like, would this be a reasonable what a thing a reasonable officer would do? And some of these things seem decidedly not reasonable. One of my most popular videos on my channel of all time was the story of a cop who comes to a house. There's a dog tethered in the backyard, and the cop there's he's not the first to arrive to the scene. There are other cops there, and he comes up like fourth in line or whatever. The cops are there. They're already like searching the house or whatever they're doing. The dog is in the backyard. He walks up to the dog who's tethered in the backyard. The dog is already at the end of its leash because it's tethered. Right. He walks right up to the dog and he shoots the dog in the back in the head for
Yeah.
no reason. And it's like, and it's like qualified immunity. I'm like, what is this stuff? It's like, where's the threat? How is this something a reasonable person would do?
Right.
I like to think I'm a fairly reasonable person, but I'm having a tough time contemplating this one.
Yeah, we see that stuff a lot, and it's not just with dogs. Dogs, of course, they're the first to go in a lot of those situations. The fact that it was on a leash and he just walked up. I've seen enough of those videos that'll make your stomach churn. It's like a total indifference to life. But that happens just with other people too. I mean, I can't tell you how many cases we've seen
Mm-hmm.
where officers just beat the hell out of a 95-year-old 21-year-old 95-pound 21-year-old college student, female, who just asked the cop to provide ID or something, on the side of the road. It's just, I don't like to beat up on cops a lot. That's not true. I do. As you know, they have an entire segment on my channel called The Bad Popo, where we talk about all the bad cops. But, there are, I think, sort of a subset of officers who are really just adrenaline junkies. They're out there to just go and break things and shoot their weapons and kill stuff. And they would never admit it, but anytime that there's a situation like that where they get to draw their weapon or execute their firearm, they're excited about that. And a big part of what we do is call those officers out, make sure that the bad cops get weaned out of the system. And we're looking for ways to do that. One of the ways is by, like you sort of, talked about, this qualified immunity stuff. If cops are not protected with this qualified immunity doctrine and they can be subject to some liability for their misconduct, that gives us more tools to weed them out of the system more quickly than just letting them just sort of, float around in the departments until they end up killing somebody. And then we all finally wise up and say, oh yeah, you're right. Maybe we should do something.
Yeah, I feel like there's got to be something better than what we have that will help us keep the police accountable. Because I'm also sympathetic to the police in one respect, because I've seen enough videos from traffic stops where it goes from 0 to 60 real quick.
Yeah.
The officer goes up to the car on a routine traffic stop, and for no reason they start shooting. I saw a video of one in Texas where this happened. The trooper comes up to the passenger side, shoots him at the passenger side. They get the guy, arrest him. As far as I think they couldn't determine why he did it. He didn't have like outstanding arrests or outstanding warrants.
Yeah.
Like, what combination of things were going through your mind. So I do have some sympathy to the police there too. And then, of course, on the flip side, I see the things that we mentioned and you talk about where the police completely overreact and it seems completely absurd. So it's like if we can have accountability on the one hand, because this guy is going to jail forever for the shooting at the police, who incidentally, although they were a state officer, was also part of a federal task force. So that means the feds also want a piece of them. So that's fun. If we can get that guy, why can't we also hold the police accountable on the other end?
Yeah, I agree. I think that we want to empower our officers to do the things that are necessary, right? They do need to protect themselves. They need to be able to act in self-defense when the time is necessary. There are those situations where you're going to have cops that are killed for no reason, right? And we just can't explain it. It's a dangerous job. I get it. But I also think that the vast majority of cop interaction with civilians should be, are mostly peaceful, right? They're mostly peaceful and they should be treated as civilian interactions. I think too often we see the police just treat people like they're in, Afghanistan or they're in the middle of Iraq or something. I mean, the way they suit up and they ride around our old town bars, just rounding up people for peeing in public and, all sorts of stuff. It's just like, guys, we're all humans here. Like, we can have conversations. You can make arrests. We don't need to beat each other and, smash heads into pavement and have people come out with stitches and stuff. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had people come into our office and they say, I really wish I would have never called the police. It was the worst experience in my life. I will never call the police ever again. And this usually happens in the situation of like a domestic violence situation, right? Where a couple's getting into an argument, they're loud, nobody's really breaking the law, nobody's, beating each other or anything like that. But in Arizona, you can be charged with disorderly conduct if let's say you're in your apartment, you're getting into an altercation with your spouse, you guys are yelling about something. We've all been there in arguments with other people, and it gets loud, and a neighbor thinks that there's something wrong. They call the police. In Arizona, they show up, they charge you with disorderly conduct. If the female called the police, it's 99% likely that the male is going to be getting arrested that night. And they do, right? So the cops show up, they take them because they can't leave without arresting somebody. Somebody's going to jail. Usually that person comes out a much worse version of themselves the next day. The wife may call us or call our office, or they'll come in, and they don't realize just how devastating law enforcement interaction is going to be to their lives. And, the spouses, even the ones who called the police, will just say, I thought that they were going to come and help. I thought that they were just going to come and just kind of calm the situation down and, alleviate the tension in the room. But no, they end up searching the house, slicing open cushions, ransacking the apartment, arresting them. And what they've done is just really harmed, I think, society. That person they've done more harm to society than the underlying altercation was. And that's the type of law enforcement that I don't think has any place here anymore. People are tired of that type of stuff where the cops do more harm than the underlying offense.
Yeah, I think that can be true in a lot of situations. It seems like the police here don't do enough, or they do way too much. I was just recording for a future release the very sad tale of Warren versus DC, where the police decidedly did not do enough, leading to very negative outcomes for the people that were involved. So there's room to be critical of the police in both directions, for doing too much, for not doing enough, and for being too aggressive, not being enough aggressive. But it's like, well, when you give the government this massive amount of power, there has to be accountability for that. And as you used to say, watching the Watchmen, it's like, that's right. Who will watch the Watchmen? Well, it's like me, you. That's a good place. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, you're right. And you, I think you hit it on the head when you were talking about, you just said accountability. I understand that cops are going to make mistakes. Defense attorneys make mistakes. Lawyers make mistakes. Judges make prosecutors. Everybody, we all do, right? We're only human. I make mistakes. I'm not above that. But what we're asking law enforcement to do is to just be a little bit more transparent about it, right? We see this all too often where one cop will do something bad. They're protected by qualified immunity. They're protected by a bizarre mess of Brady rules, of accountability. Like, you can't find who these cops are. In Phoenix, we had this scandal where they were just sort of voluntarily wiping cops' records clean after a couple of years. Just wipe them clean on their own, just gone with the wind. So you really can't see what cops have done for longer than, I think it was 5 years. After 5 years, it was just gone, and it was negotiated by the police union with our board of supervisors. So you can have a cop, all they got to do is just wait till that 5-year mark, and then all their misconduct, all the malfeasance just drops off. And there's just no accountability for it. And so that sets us as defense attorneys, as criminal defendants, at a total disadvantage. They still maintain the monopoly on power, but they also are essentially immune from any history, accountability, or record of their misconduct. And they're allowed to just continue on the force, protected by the bureaucracy, by the politicians, by the police chief. And it's really, really hard to sort of peel the layers back of that onion when they don't give us the tools to do so.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I did want to mention, because it was I think it was the thing that really brought you to my attention the most, because I thought you did the best work of anybody on it, was the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff, especially in the early days of Kyle Rittenhouse. I thought you did the best work of anyone, and I said so on my channel in live streams, where you really went through the facts and the timelines. You showed maps and diagrams to really try to lay out the factual elements of what was going on, and I learned a lot from your coverage of that. And also, I just wanted to say that I thought that was really, really good work on your part. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That was such an interesting case. I mean, I don't know how much interesting work I did on it. It's just an interesting case. I mean, it was just wild how that all unfolded, and sort of the different narratives that were, surrounding it. It became this political case.
Don't sell yourself short. As far as I'm concerned, you did the best job of, like, literally everyone, including major media, because no one else was really when you were doing it, trying to put together timelines, or actually going through the deep dive and actually trying to put things in like a sequence of events, like, a reporter might do. Yeah. So, don't sell yourself too short, man. I think you did the best work, period.
Well, I appreciate it. My only sort of goal there was to just kind of assemble the facts and, just to look at it sort of objectively. If I was going to be representing Kyle, or if I was going to be representing a victim, somebody who got shot, what would that look like? And what I was seeing from the mainstream media and from a lot of the commentators, around the internet, was just very surface level, very topical stuff. What's a white kid who's 17 doing with a gun? He's a racist, and so on and so forth. And you're like, wait a minute, that's kind of not what happened here. Or by contrast, everybody says, he was free to just, mow down the whole mob of people. Well, that's not really fair either. Maybe we should sort of take it a piecemeal, take little bite-sized chunks, and see what we can figure out.
I don't know if you have any opinion on the subject, but there was a lot of criticism of some of his legal counsel as well. Yeah. That they felt that they were kind of screwing him over. And it did take them like 3 weeks to get him out of bail, even after they posted bail, even after they appeared to have raised the money for it, because they were some crowdfunding and stuff where they appeared to have enough money to bail out the client, and did not immediately bail out the client, which seems like a questionable decision to me.
Yeah, I have. I've really been sort of biting my tongue on it, because as it's easy to sort of armchair quarterback the whole thing. Yeah. We're not on Kyle's case, and we don't understand, we don't see the same things that they see. But I would tell you this, that of the stuff that I was able to see, a lot of the moves that they were making didn't make any sense at all. And I was just sort of shocked by it. First of all, Ellen Wood has no criminal legal experience, as far as I could tell from any of his website or anything at that point. Now, his role has sort of taken on a whole new can of worms lately because of this election sort of.
Yeah, it's not like we have better things to do with our time, right? Like help the client with the murder charges or anything.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what he's talking about anymore. And then the other guy, John Pierce, also had almost no criminal history, or no criminal I would say acumen, because that's not his channel. But there was some weird stuff going on. Like they were gonna. So Kyle, obviously this happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and then they moved him over. I think it was to Illinois. And is that right? Yeah. And so they moved him over there. Yeah. Then they were going to challenge extradition for a number of different months.
Yeah, they tried.
They failed. Then John Pierce came out and said that they were going to appeal the extradition order, but he had already been transported back to Wisconsin at that point in time. And I'm like, wait a minute, did you file your appeal yet? Or what's going on? And then when he got back,
it felt like fighting extradition was a waste of time.
Totally a waste of time. That's what that was my entire thing. And so he was sitting in custody for, I think, 2 months while
it's a total waste of time. I mean, extradition is a gimme.
Right.
As long as the paperwork's there, it's like,
yeah,
okay. It's easy.
Right. Well, and he's out now, right? So as soon he gets transferred back over, they raise the money, he post bond, and he's out of custody. So in my opinion, he sat in custody for 60 days or whatever that length of time was, because his attorneys were just goofing off with the media. They were
even after he was extradited back to Wisconsin, I think he sat in the cell for 3 weeks with a bond of $2 million, and they had the money. And I've never had the privilege of being a criminal defense attorney, but I know that bail out the client is usually pretty high on the priority list if you have the money. So unless you're trying to do something like very specific, like, I don't know, you're trying to run some sort of speedy trial and you're using the jail because you're getting like triple time credit or something to force the prosecution's hand or something. So unless you're trying to do something like that, like, bail out the client seems like a pretty high priority.
Yeah, it's extremely high, and especially when it's a 17-year-old, young man who has I think a pretty good self-defense claim that is underlying the entire case. I mean, my initial criticism was, well, we found a different case that was also in Kenosha. A woman named, I think it was Crystal Kaiser. She was also right around the same age as Kyle. I think she was 17, and then she was also being charged with murder. She had shot somebody who was, I think, using her sort of as a sex trafficker. So she's also being charged with murder. And she got a bond. Her original bond, I think, was $1 million, got it reduced down to $400,000 in Kenosha, same jurisdiction, same district attorney. And Kyle's was was set originally at $2 million. And I sort of did a compare and contrast between the two cases and said, I think Kyle could probably get his bond reduced, or he could easily raise enough money to post it. And so from the very beginning, I was saying, send him back to Kenosha, because he's going to get out of custody there. Like, that's the best venue for him to see some freedom. And, like you said, they just were kicking the can down the road. There's another guy by the name, I think his name is Don Lewis. He's over on medium.com. He writes a lot of articles, very, very critical of L. Linwood and of John Pierce. And he does these deep dives into their sort of financial problems going on, all sorts of, major issues that are probably a little too meaty for us to get into now. But
you may or may not have seen that the District Court of Delaware wants a piece of Linwood, and they think that they committed violations. They want to bring them up on ethics violations to provoke his pro hoc vice, which presumably could lead to problems down the line. So Linwood's situation isn't looking super positive. And I did see, was it Dominion Voting Systems, or was it one of the people working for Dominion? I think it was Dominion themselves who sent a cease and desist to Sidney Powell. And Linwood wrote back as attorney for Sidney Powell, being like, no. And I'm like, well, this is just lawyer inception now. So we got Linwood apparently representing Sidney Powell against Dominion. I'm like, that should end pretty well.
Yeah, I had not seen that. I did see that Dominion and Smartmatic, I think, were making those cease and desist letters.
Yeah, and even Newsmax had to back off with some of their claims when they're spending backwards fast. It's like, we have no specific evidence, no specific claims. Like, you might want to have something before you rake our product completely over the coals. Some sort of evidence would be helpful. So,
right, I'm for that. I mean, look, if they want to stand by their companies and correct the record, they're free to use those tools. I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, and if, we can't just make stuff up.
Right.
We actually have to have evidence. And I don't know what your general impression is. Not that I read every lawsuit or every case, because God knows there were enough of them with the election. But the ones I did read felt pretty thin. And the facts didn't really seem to be there. There was a whole bunch of different results. Even the ones that went to merits decisions. I remember one on a preliminary injunction where the judge actually looked at the relevant sides and said, well, on the one side, we've got we got the government officials, like the head of the elections for the county and the person who was there and this election official, all saying everything was fine. And the other side, your best witness is a guy who says, I think, I saw, perhaps, perchance, someone potentially filling in a ballot, maybe for Biden. It's like the judges look at this like, this doesn't feel like the most rock solid, as we're weighing this out on the preliminary injunction standard, it doesn't feel like you have the best case of all time. So it seemed a little thin. What was your overall impression of the lawsuits?
Yeah, the lawsuits specifically, I think I would agree with that. I mean, I've analyzed a lot of them, and I think a lot of them present interesting ideas. Some of the ones that really have stood out more to me have been the ones that go down to some of the more fundamental questions that I think lawyers are interested in. The general public is certainly interested in the Kraken, right? The Kraken, yeah, the Kraken. What is the big thing? And Sidney Powell comes out and says, well, Dominion was created in Venezuela by Hugo Chavez, and all of those types of claims, which sound very interesting, but legally they're just not that it's not that exciting, right? Okay, so what if that happened, right? What does that have to do with the state of Georgia in the election in 2020, right? Can you tell me specifically? And so what I was seeing, helpful. It would have been helpful. And I was sort of seeing a disconnect. My criticisms of the lawsuits have been that the harm doesn't really match the relief that has been sought. So, they're saying, well, we have a number of these people who voted in multiple states. Well, how many do you have? We got 2,200 of them. Okay, well, what should we do about that? Well, we should throw out 7 million votes out of Pennsylvania.
2,200 is also smaller than the margin of error. So,
right. And so we saw a lot of those, and they were they were asking for courts to do something, which to me seems sort of unconscionable. And so, yeah, I think I would agree that most of the election litigation has been.
Yeah, this has also been my problem with some of my brethren on the right, because I consider myself a member of the right. But some of my problem with some of the brethren on the right is some of the stuff they're calling for in some of these remedies. And right. I'm speaking also of the general public here. It's like if you got that, I mean, you do understand power goes both ways. You do understand It wouldn't be too long before we were on the wrong side of that. You want the federal government to come and interfere by saying that state election laws are unconstitutional. It's like, okay, it's like, you better be sure you want that. You want them to throw out elections. You want them to make states, ratify. It's like, do you really want all those things? Because have you thought this through ahead at all? That's one of the things that's sort of, one of the things I always think about as conservatives, or as a conservative principle, is trying to think things through a little bit. Being a little bit risk averse is a classic conservative trait. It's like, here's what would happen if all that happened, and that sounds like a bad plan. And it seems like some of my right-leaning brethren are not of what I consider to be a classically conservative mindset when it comes to some of these remedy suggestions.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, one of the latest iterations of that is this martial law stuff. This idea that, well, we're only military.
So let's just think about that for about 1 second and just try to think about what that would actually mean.
It's troubling.
We could have martial law for a limited purpose, just to get the voting machines. And the next president will certainly only do that for exactly that reason, and nothing more ever again.
Right. Yeah. Meanwhile, we just literally watched Congress cram down $2.4 trillion down all of our throats that most of the country, I think, wasn't particularly happy with.
I can't lie. I do miss the fiscal conservatives. I didn't feel like there's a lot of fiscal conservatives out there who are like, how are we paying for all this, or how are we budgeting for that? Didn't feel a lot of that love on that one. Yeah.
Right. But the point is, if you're expecting the government to do, to take limited actions and to only do things within the scope of their power and to be very reasonable and benevolent, it doesn't happen. It's not our political system. It's not how it works. So bringing the military in sounds like a bad idea for that reason.
It does seem like a bad idea. I think at least from my perspective, and I've said this before, and this is not the first time I've said this, and maybe you'll disagree with me, I don't know. But it feels to me, I mean, this election was different because we had more mail-in ballots, which is understandable. There's reasons we had more mail-in ballots that are pretty easily figured out. And it is true that courts have spoken about mail-in ballots being more susceptible to problems than in-person ballots because there's more points of attack, especially with the elderly. Even the Supreme Court has written this in the past. Mm-hmm. All that being said, however, I've taken a look at the election lawsuits that have been had. I've taken a look at least vaguely or generally aware of the election lawsuits that have been in the past, because it's not the first time this has happened. And it didn't feel to me like there was categorically more fraud or more problems in this election than past elections, trying to adjust, for the difference of proportions and stuff. Because, every election there are problems somewhere of some variety, and it felt to me that everything was kind of normal and in sort of the. I mean, these the conservatives or Republicans are screaming about Dominion voting. We can scroll back the clock and we can look at the Democrats screaming about Diebold. We can make these comparisons all day long, but it seemed kind of, we're a big country. We usually vote on a county level, if not precinct level. I don't know how many precincts there are in the United States. Lots. So some of this is just kind of noise that you'd expect. So maybe you'll disagree with me. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of issues sort of, wrapped into that. I think that a lot of the election litigation that we saw that was alleging, specific instances of fraud that we could extrapolate across the entire election, I think that those largely fell flat. The idea here that there was sort of systemic signature fraud out of Georgia, for example, in any of those lawsuits, they just haven't gone anywhere because the evidence, I think, has been pretty weak. It's been pretty lacking. And I think that has been sort of repeated across the board in the various states. I'm not saying that there, wasn't any fraud. I think that everybody would agree that there is some fraud in every election.
It would be ridiculous to say that there was no fraud for exactly the same reason. We're a huge country with a lot of elections. To say there's zero fraud would be absurd.
Right. So I think we can all agree on that. And then the idea, a lot of the lawsuits then have been making specific claims and then trying to extrapolate those claims into a bigger version of relief, saying, okay, we have this little subset of fraud here, and we think that this extrapolates to 7 million votes. Therefore, we should throw out 7 million votes, or throw out buckets of ballots from one subset. And I would agree with you that I think largely those have fallen flat. The more interesting thing that I think that has, I'd say political malfeasance. I don't even know if fraud is the right word for it, but it was sort of this orchestration of election litigation, in my mind, that was set in motion to exploit the COVID situation, really. And I was covering election litigation on our channel before the election even started. I covered, I think, 6 or 7 different lawsuits, or at least touched on them briefly. But what we saw, and I went over to SCOTUS blog, they had a 2020 election litigation tracker.
Yeah, that was helpful.
Very helpful. And I was monitoring those before the election, and I saw this weird pattern of a lot of lawsuits that were being filed by Democrats against Democrats. So out of Pennsylvania, for example, we had Pennsylvania Democratic National Committee, or whatever that committee, Pennsylvania Democratic Party, whatever it is, suing Kathy Boockvar, who is also a Democrat. She's the Secretary of State. She runs the elections there in Pennsylvania. And so you're thinking, well, why is that happening? And then I started looking, and I was seeing all of the funding, like, who was filing all of these various lawsuits. And we connected it back to the Retired Association People of America. And they have different chapters in Michigan and Georgia and so on. And so, you kind of connect the money back, and you can follow it from Priorities USA. It's being funded by, major money, and they trickle that down to all of these different other organizations that file the lawsuits on the local, individual, state level. And, and that sort of raised a red flag to me. It's like, well, why are they changing the rule? Or why are they trying to change the rules literally, 2 minutes before the game starts? And that didn't sit real well with me. And then when you dissect a lot of those claims and you look at the results of those claims, the courts and, the different executive agencies around the country were changing the rules. And it's clear, right? You can go look at it. Now, what like, for example, in Pennsylvania, they moved the election back 3 days, right? So the deadline was 3 days. And I think in North Carolina, it was 12 days. That's just one example where the courts changed the rules on their own, and they found a basis to do it. They went back and they found, COVID gives us certain exceptions and executive authority.
Viva Frei was pointing this out as well, where these were a lot of consent decrees. So they were friendly lawsuits. They were lawsuits maybe manufactured specifically in order to settle, to manufacture changes. So that might be a problem.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so now the bigger question that I thought was very interesting was, how does that work? Because if you're going to have a judge stepping all over, a judiciary stepping all over the legislature, or you're going to have an executive branch stepping all over the legislature, that's a bigger issue in my mind, right? That's troubling. That's concerning. And I think that is the bigger issue, that we've seen sort of this last minute changing of the rules right before the game started. And I think the Republicans were largely caught flat footed, and the rules were changed to certainly benefit one party. Right. It was to make mail-in voting much easier. It was to make like absentee, balloting much more universal. We saw this massive rush to sort of, enfranchise a lot of voters. And that's what the backdrop has been. The premise has been, well, we want more people voting, and grandma can't vote if we don't have these changes because of COVID. And that just, it shifted the whole landscape a little bit in a way that favored, I think, one political party much more than another. And it used one of the tools that we've all concurred that is a lot more ripe for fraud, for malfeasance in the terms of mail-in voting. And the courts have recognized that. They just haven't recognized it in this one particular instance, that opening this door resulted in a floodgate of unlawful ballots. They haven't made that connection yet. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but they just, the evidence has been weak. And if the Republicans were caught flat-footed, prior to the election, and they didn't get the attorneys in place to make sure the rules weren't weighted against them, well, then they were caught flat-footed after the election too, because they didn't have enough poll watchers. They didn't have enough observable evidence to go in and bring into a court of law.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised some really, really fair points in terms, and there's some sort of very fundamental existential stuff behind all that, about like what different branches of government should be doing what kind of stuff, and what's proper for courts to do and versus other, entities. And some of that would have to be answered by looking really very closely at the entire law, potentially, because you looked at not potentially only the election law, but also other laws beyond that, because there might be emergency powers somewhere, or, especially if it's doing the executive, the legislatures often grant wide range of implementation powers and discretion to the executive. And there's that too. And then to the degree to which the judicial branch may or may not be able to justly interpret the law in such a way as to deal with the extraordinary realities that are currently going on. So that's sort of something exceptional. I mean, in the very unexceptional normal reality, it would not be unusual for a court to say extend the time at a particular polling location. It's like, oh, there weren't enough ballots, or their power was out, or there was some sort of disruption. So the law says we're going to stop the voting at 7, but I rule that we'll keep the balloting open until 9. That would be a very, very typical thing to happen. It's not unusual for that to occur. So is what happened here, where we're going to give you another 3 days, or we're going to give you X amount more times, we're going to do this. Is this of that kind, where these are these kind of changes that are within the normal domain, or the exceptional? So there's some really sort of philosophical stuff at root there that is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and the courts, I think, are agreeing with that latter explanation, that this stuff is pretty normal, that it is COVID. We have all sorts of emergency powers. We can kind of just move things around. And the Supreme Court needs to confirm that they don't care, right? If you want to run an election, however the hell you want to run it in your state, fair game. You can do what you want. You're accountable only to your political. The proper remedy there is political recourse within your local state government. Texas can't come into Pennsylvania and tell them what to do. But if Pennsylvania, if you want to run, I'm not saying this is the case, but if you want to run a corrupt election and do what, move things around, have your judiciary flip flop, have your governor appoint, whatever, go for it. Right. The Supreme Court says that's fair game.
Yeah, an internal state matter, maybe. Yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah, and some of this really interesting with the whole thing. I thought also maybe we could talk a little bit about Second Amendment law, because it's another passion of mine.
Sure.
It's really a topic of interest. I'm going to flex now that I paid someone when I lived in DC. I paid someone to line sit in for me, so I got to see the arguments for both Heller and McDonald in person. So that was pretty kick-ass. And
that's amazing.
I've met Dick Keller a couple of times, and I also met McDonald once, but he's a much quieter guy. Dick Keller does not have that problem. But yeah, I was there for both those oral arguments. It was really cool to be there as those cases were being argued. So I've been more than a little bit disappointed at the Supreme Court collectively that we haven't had more cases on Second Amendment law, because every year on First Amendment, there's like one, two, three, four First Amendment cases like every year.
Yeah.
And there has been since, I don't know, the 1930s, when they decided that the Bill of Rights existed and they should actually look at it. So they've been doing that for a while. So it's like, why can't we do that in Second Amendment world? The last, other than McDonald, and there was also basically a slip opinion dealing with tasers. I think it was out of Massachusetts or something, where it was, pro-arm decision. But other than that, it's like we haven't had any decisions. NYS RPA was the closest, and that got digged basically for being moot because they settled or basically undid all the law, so they wouldn't have jurisdiction. It's like, why is this? But why even create the problem? Why not grant like 5 of them every year? They can't moot them all. Let's actually do some Second Amendment law.
Yeah, the Second Amendment stuff is very interesting. It sounds like you're a little more up to speed on the jurisprudence than I am. I haven't spent a lot of time sort of diving into it recently. I think largely because it kind of, it kind of ebbs and flows, the Second Amendment stuff. Every time there's a new shooting, everybody's up in arms, pun intended on that. Everybody wants to ban guns. We see a lot like the last example was from I remember when Beto was really like, that was his entire Beto, bro. Yeah. Let's go tubular, man. Yeah. He was that was his entire campaign, right? That was his entire
that was kind of his campaign, yeah.
Yeah, it was
just Biden still might appoint him director of ATF. Who knows?
Gosh, that'd be hilarious. But yeah, I mean, that was the momentum. Was that after the Las Vegas shooting, or there was something, or maybe that was the congressional shooting? I don't remember, but it was a big thing until it wasn't a big thing anymore. And now guns are flying off the shelves. I mean, the last time I went into a gun store was right around July 4th.
Finding ammo is really, really hard. Yeah, finding guns is really, really hard. And some of my left-leaning brethren, specifically because of the riots and civil unrest, are saying, maybe it would be a good idea if we could defend ourselves. I'm like, oh, well, welcome to the party, left-leaning brethren. Right this way. Can I sign you up for a membership in a gun rights organization?
Yes, yeah. I bought my mom her first firearm, and my mom is one of those people. What did I get her? I got her a little 9mm. Honestly, I think it was a Taurus. It was something small. I'll tell you this. So I went, her birthday is on July 4th, which is America's holiday. So I went into the gun store around that time, and there was nothing left. I mean, the gun store that I'm in regularly is, floor to ceiling, just lined with firearms all over the place. There's shelves, glass shelves everywhere. They had nothing left. I bought like one of the last 9mm in the store, and I was like, does it work? They're like, yep. I'm like, all right, I'll take it. Whatever. I don't even care what it is. It's like there's nothing left. So I didn't put a whole lot of thought on it in that. Don't tell my mom, but it's sort of indicative, that people, I think, are recognizing that this is pretty important. And maybe that may be what, that's why the Supreme Court doesn't necessarily want to wade into that.
Yeah, it's just, it's annoying, because if you ask me to explain the First Amendment, it would take an hour for me to lay it out. But it's like I can go through tiers of scrutiny and different kinds of speech, and I can do it all. Yeah. But if you ask me about the Second Amendment, I'm like, I don't know. All I can do is spew my personal opinions about here's how I interpret the Second Amendment. Here's how what I think it means. And then I argue with my chat about whether or not I'm right. But of course I am, because I'm on civil law.
Of course.
but it would be nice to be able to have more to work with, so that I wasn't just speculating so much. So I don't know if Amy Coney Barrett is going to be the end all be all. She did write the one Second Amendment opinion that was hopeful. We haven't heard enough from her to really see where she's going to sit on any of these issues, but I'm hopeful. We'll see. Maybe we'll get some Second Amendment cases. Did you see the ATF revoked its call for that guidance on the pistol brace thing?
I didn't see the revocation of it. I did see the original article on that. Yeah, I mean, that's good news.
Yeah, they revoked their guidance. They revoked the request for input on the guidance. So they're getting rid of that. So I don't know if that's indicative of blowback and indicative of concern. So there's definitely that. And I thought maybe we could end just on COVID and lockdowns.
Sure.
Because that's an issue that, is an issue where, first of all, I saw that the New York governor, I think, got kicked in the butt today by the courts for some of his stuff, saying that it even didn't pass strict scrutiny, unless I am hallucinating. So didn't Cuomo get spanked by the courts today?
So I didn't see that. No, I mean, I spent this afternoon prepping for my show, and I didn't cover that today. But that, that wouldn't surprise me. And I think we've seen sort of a trend of that. Wasn't there another judge out of I think actually in Michigan, right? The Governor Whitmer.
Yeah. There's been quite a few. There's been Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, I've covered a half dozen of them. There's also our my channel's personal favorite, what we call based Judge Stickman, who coming from Pennsylvania, striking it down. But yeah, that was a lot of fun too. Really looking that up too. Yeah, I was just going to share this real fast so I could share on the screen, because I can do that in StreamYards. If I can find out where I was, because I've lost my tabs, as I try to do stuff on the fly like a good YouTuber. I know what I'm doing. So the Manhattan Appeal Courts blocked Cuomo's limits on religious gatherings. This is basically the ones that have been striking down for COVID. This is kind of the same thing. This was the same thing out of Colorado. This was also Pennsylvania. A lot of these restrictions, they're weird on just a philosophical level, because they treat churches worse than other kinds of businesses, even other like critical businesses. They say churches are critical, but they keep treating them as worse than, even though they have special constitutional protection. So the Court of Appeals in New York said that the discriminates against religion. Oh, apologize, not the Court of Appeals, the U.S. Court of Appeals for Second Circuit. So that's federal, struck it down. Challenge here specifically disproportionately burden religious exercise. They got to stop doing this, man. Didn't they read their First Amendment? Apparently not.
No. Yeah, I've been very, very, very critical of these lockdowns just across the board. It's again, I don't really see how, it's kind of full theme here, but how the remedy here, matches the harm. I haven't seen that, and if somebody could tell me how hair salons are transmitting COVID, or how, churches are doing it.
Nancy Pelosi doesn't believe they are, right?
I know. I mean, it's just sort of like, let's just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and maybe that'll help COVID. And I don't like to do that when we're playing with people's lives, when we're playing with their businesses, with their religion, with their personal relationships, to just say, well, we're going to try it. Now, for a little while, that was okay. Like, I can understand that, to say, okay, look, we have to lock things down because we have to build capacity in our medical systems. But indefinitely, I
remember when it was 14 days to fly on the curve, Robert.
Yeah. We had in Arizona. 14. Yeah, Arizona, like 15 days to slow the spread. That was our governor.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but California is experiencing a massive outbreak right now, even though they're under the strictest lockdown. Even their own health officials today were quoted as basically saying, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what to do. We've already have all the lockdowns in the world. The COVID continues to spread. Maybe the COVID just also hates your state on a personal level. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of criticisms I have of California, so I wouldn't put it past COVID to share some of those. But it's one of those things. If it worked, like if they could show us that it worked, okay, we locked down this state. 30 days later, we had 0 COVID cases, and if we just did it for 6 months, or I'm sorry, 6 weeks or something, then we could eliminate this thing. Then okay, like we can have that conversation. But they still don't know what the hell they're talking about, and the goalposts change every month, right? Fauci is just saying now, well, I was just estimating about those things, and not to get into.
Well, no, and he's also saying that he lied, which is because he was saying about the vaccines and how many people need to take vaccine for there to be immunity, and he was saying, I covered that on my channel like 2 days ago, where he basically said, I was making up those numbers because I didn't think people could tolerate the real numbers, and he also said, I'm planning on lying to people in the future. I'm like, well, that's great. So I can't trust anything you say. That's wonderful news.
Right. No, the COVID hysteria, man, has been very frustrated. They tell us don't wear masks. They don't work. Wear masks. They work, and then it's one thing after another, just nonstop. This thing is spread airborne. It's not, it lives on the surface for 30 days. Then it doesn't. And it's, you can get it again, and then you can't get it again. Asymptomatic spread is a real worry. Now it's not so much a real worry. It's like, it's nonstop. It's never ending. And if they had some evidence that we could lean on, then I'd be open to talking about what the solution is. You know, if we have a remedy in mind, we can talk about implementing the remedy. But right now, man, it just feels like they're just throwing stuff around and seeing if it works. And most of it just doesn't work. And so if we're going to be, you know, just kind of playing around with people's lives, we should do so with a little bit more carefulness, because people, I run a law firm here. We have a number of employees, you know, and we've seen the impacts of this thing.
But the economy doesn't matter, Robert.
I know
people's lives don't matter. That's the thing that it must just be pure politics, I guess, because every time Trump says, well, maybe there are things other than, you know, the virus that we should factor in. It's like, no, all that matters is life and death. And then I mean, the states are like, can we have a bailout? Can we? And they're trying to pass the stimulus, and new stimulus, this third stimulus or whatever. It's like, but I thought that didn't matter. I thought all that mattered was life and death. So why are you trying to pass the stimulus?
Yeah.
Like, can't we have a more complicated, sophisticated conversation about, you know, people's lives and their health is an important factor. Other important factors might include their ability to earn money so that they can feed their children and have homes to live in, and
right.
You know, also liberty is a value that's measurable and important as an entity. And can we like actually have a sophisticated conversation? But the answer to that apparently is no, because then we're not taking life seriously, and we should just bail everyone out forever.
Yeah, I mean, my frustration with it is that they are telling us what to do and what to think, rather than giving us any autonomy to make those decisions for ourselves. You know, like you just mentioned, Fauci's literally lying to us. Why? Because they think we're too stupid, that we just can't understand the ramifications. If I want to go and work out at a gym, and they know what the possible adverse consequences of that are, and I know what the possible adverse consequences of it are, and we enter into an agreement to go do those things, then I think that we should, be given some freedom and some autonomy to do that.
What do you bench, Robert?
I'm sorry?
What do you bench?
So it's a good question. I did bench today. I got up to 245, sort of, I think 245 at about three reps for the end of my set. And then I sort of I typically try to rep at 225s. If I have a spotter, I can go up to 265, 275. I was really pushing to break 300 last year, but I don't have much of a spotting partner.
You gotta get that 315 for the 3-plate, man.
Yeah, I know. I've never hit that. I honestly have never hit that, and I would like to do that. It's probably going to be a 2021 goal, but I need a spotter now. But you can't have a spotter because we're all social distance from everybody. So I'm on my own. Yeah.
Well, I don't need a safety edges. They'll be fine.
Yeah, that's true. I know.
Yeah, I know. I didn't bunch that much. I was about the 265. I'm out of practice. I'm just starting to get back into it now. So I was just doing basic squats today because I was just trying to get back into it. So I was doing squats at 100, which is lame. But it's like got to start easy. But yeah, I was doing I was doing squats at like 300 plus. I was doing bunches at like 2 and change. So I'll try to get back to that again. So that'll be fun. I did see that in your saw that in your book too, where you mentioned that you work out. So I was like, yeah. But when you mentioned gym, I'm like, oh, I can go back to that too.
Yeah, well, it's very important for me. It keeps me grounded. It keeps me focused. It's sort of like my meditation. I make it a sort of a non-negotiable part of my day. It's just something I have to get done and get out of the way. And I feel much better. I perform better. I think more clearly. And when it comes to COVID and stuff, it's healthier, right? We want people to be outside, exercising, eating well, and supporting their immune system.
Do we though?
I would think so.
Yeah. No, the outside is bad. We have to be locked inside further. We can't have parks. We can't have parks or sun or outside or happiness.
Right. Yeah, and all of the evidence
causes the COVID to spread.
Yeah. Well, right, and we're seeing more and more correlations with vitamin D and all sorts of,
Isn't your wife's name Joy?
Is my wife's name?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not married. No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Faith Joy was your wife. I apologize.
No, she's not my wife. No, nope. She's on the team over here at our law firm, and
sorry, my bad.
No,
you have a person literally named Joy working for you. You're totally a host because of the happiness.
So her name's Faith, and then I think on our Discord it's Faithy Joy, something like that. She's outstanding. She helps me with a lot here.
Yeah, that's really awesome. How many people do you have working for your firm?
We are at, I want to say 21 now. And
That's impressive. That's a
we're,
good size firm. I was
yeah,
anything over 5 would have been impressive, for that. That's good. That's good work.
yeah, thank you. I mean, we're super proud of it. It's taken a lot of work to get here. We have an awesome team. I mean, honestly, it's, kind of the hardest part, I think, of running a business is curating that team and building a good culture. It's been a
Yeah.
lot of work, and we finally sort of found our stride. We're about 6 years old now, and we've got, our principles in place. We've got our culture really solidified. We have an awesome team. Everybody sort of believes in the vision, and it's been very freeing in many degrees. I mean, I started the show and YouTube essentially. This year we've seen a lot of growth, largely because of the team, of the support that I have personally. Faith is just one component of that, but we have an awesome team here. We're very fortunate.
That's really, really cool. Well, I've enjoyed our conversation. So if there's any topics you'd like to explore in particular, I'm happy to. But otherwise, I'm happy to wrap it up because I've kept you for an hour and change, and I feel that's fair.
Yeah, no, that's good. Let's wrap it up here because I still got to get dinner and go home, and I've already been live streaming for about 2.5 hours before I
No,
hop
you're
on
you're
here.
you're a glutton for punishment. You
Well,
do this
listen,
whole stream and come on to my stream.
no, I'm grateful for you for reaching out and kind of staying after us a little bit to make sure this got scheduled. Like I said, I'm sort of new. I've been doing a lot of videos on YouTube for a long time, but this is my, this last 6 months or so has been really me trying to get I call it my training wheels on, on this live stream stuff, and sort of figuring out how to communicate using this platform, and how to, facilitate this stuff. And you've been helpful and gracious to the channel, and I appreciate that. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, and again, something I've said a couple times, it's like I want to talk to everyone who's kind of doing this in the same space. It's like I basically want to just build a new academy. It's
Yeah.
like the academy is anywhere people want to learn. So it's like I just arbitrarily declare myself a professor because I can, and I
Yeah.
want to talk to all the other people who are in this space and basically have conversations and discussions. So I've talked, with Viva. I got my start talking with Leonard French, talk with Viva, talk with Nate, talk with Emily. So I got some prosecutors in there, talk with you, trying to get Hogue Law on, talk with Nick Ricada,
Cool.
trying to just talk with people. And I find it's really, really good. So I hope you'll be able to do more of this with me in the future and other lawyers too, because it's fun.
Yeah, it is fun. And I absolutely will. Like I said, I'm just sort of trying to get my bearing straight on it. And I appreciate you,
You must be
making
doing
me,
something right. You got almost 100K, man. I'm jealous. Or maybe
we've all, again, super fortunate, very, very grateful for that. And it's very, very, very kind of surreal to be on your show because I watched you, I've watched you for so long, and then now, here we are. So life is funny.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I'll simply conclude to say I've enjoyed talking to my guest, Robert Gruler. You can check him out at R&R Law Group. He does a daily stream every weekday because he loves to talk to you just that much. And
Yes.
you can go check him out his channel. He does good stuff. And if you have not already, please remember to go over his channel also and subscribe. He's at 94,000 and change last time I checked. So trying to crack that 100,000 mark so he can get that silver play button, which he richly deserves. That'd be fantastic. Until later, my friends, I've been Uncivil Law. I hope you're well. Peace and good night.